We all know the name Martin Luther King Jr., of course, but behind the monument, there was a man. And, behind the dream, there was a deliberate, really hard-won strategy. So we're going to dig into how that strategy was forged, through moments of humiliation, trial and error, and yes, incredible bravery.
Okay, let's just jump right in with this. Black America still wears chains. The finest Negro is at the mercy of the meanest white man. So powerful, right? And get this, that was from his very first public speech. He was just 15 years old. It just goes to show you, long before he was this global icon, he was a teenager who saw the world with this searing, just undeniable clarity. So, to really get the revolutionary, we've got to go back and meet the boy. He was born Michael King Jr. in Atlanta, Georgia, and his entire worldview, everything he knew, was shaped by the harsh realities of the segregated South. He grew up right here, in this house on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, and his early life was just so profoundly shaped by his family, especially his father, Martin Sr., who taught him his first and, maybe his most important lessons in defiance. Yeah, so there's this story about them being in a shoe store. The clerk tells his father they have to move to the back, and Martin Sr. just refuses. He says, we'll either buy shoes sitting here or we won't buy any shoes at all. Imagine seeing that as a kid. He witnessed firsthand that dignity, well, it wasn't something you ask for politely. It was something you asserted, calmly and firmly, even when you're staring down bigotry. But, defiance didn't always win the day. There was this other time. He was 15, on a bus ride home from a speech contest, actually. He was forced to stand up so white passengers could sit. He later said it was the angriest I have ever been in my life. And that moment of deep, personal humiliation, that wasn't just a bad memory. It became the fuel, the fuel for a determination that would literally change the nation. And then everything changed one summer. He got a job on a tobacco farm up in Connecticut, and it just blew his mind. It was like seeing two different Americas. For the first time, he saw a different reality. He wrote home about how black and white people went to the same churches. Can you imagine? This experience, it proved that the segregated world he grew up in wasn't the only way. It wasn't inevitable. It gave him a vision of what America could be. Okay, so this brings us to Montgomery, Alabama. It's 1954. King is just 25 years old, and he becomes the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Now, he had no way of knowing it at the time, but this one move, it placed him right at the absolute epicenter of American history. And it all kicked off, as many of you know, when Rosa Parks was arrested. The community was absolutely ready for action, but they needed a leader. And so they turned to this new guy in town, the 26-year-old minister. Part of the reason was that he was a fresh face, someone who could unite all the different groups. He was actually hesitant at first, but he accepted the role. 385 days. Just let that sink in for a second. 385 days. For over a year, the entire black community of Montgomery refused to ride the city buses. They walked to work, they organized massive carpools. It was just an incredible, sustained display of mass commitment and personal sacrifice. So the boycott, it completely transformed King into a national figure. But that new fame, it came at a terrifying cost. He wasn't just a leader anymore. He was a target. And the situation got so tense that his own home was bombed with his wife and young daughter inside. This was the moment the life and death stakes of the struggle became brutally, terrifyingly real. Now, Montgomery was a huge victory, no doubt. But the path forward, it was anything but clear. King and the whole movement, they had to learn and adapt their strategy. And a lot of the time, that happened through pretty painful trial and error. And this right here is a perfect tale of two cities. It really shows that learning process in action. First, you have the Albany movement in 1961. There, the police chief was clever. He used mass arrests, but he kept it low-key, no public violence. And that denied the movement the media attention it desperately needed. The whole campaign just stalled. It was a huge setback. But King learned. He learned a critical lesson. For the next big campaign in Birmingham, the goal was completely different. They were going to intentionally create a crisis so big the nation couldn't possibly look away. And here's the really crucial part of the strategy. He chose Birmingham specifically because its police commissioner, a guy named Bull Connor, was infamous for his violent racism. King was literally counting on him to overreact. So when King gets arrested for the 13th time, that wasn't a failure. No way.
That was the plan all along. And from that jail cell, he wrote one of the most important documents of the 20th century. In his letter from Birmingham jail, he just lays out this powerful defense of his strategy. He argues against all the people telling him to wait for a more convenient season for justice. He explained that no, nonviolent direct action is absolutely necessary to create the kind of tension that forces real negotiation. And it worked. The shocking images that came out of Birmingham, police dogs, high-pressure fire hoses being turned on children, they did exactly what King knew they would. They horrified the nation. They forced the White House and the Kennedy administration to finally pay attention. The strategy of confrontation, of creating a crisis, it had worked. So, the moral authority, the political momentum they gained in Birmingham, it was just unstoppable. And it led directly to the movement's most iconic, its most triumphant moment. I'm talking, of course, about the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Over 250,000 people, 250,000 people, black and white together, gathered in the nation's capital. And it was right there, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, that he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. A speech that cemented his place not just as a civil rights leader, but as a moral leader for the entire world. And this, right here, is why it all matters. This is the payoff. The struggle on the streets, the arrests, the marches, all of it translated directly into real landmark legislation. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, these laws fundamentally reshaped American society. The strategy of protest led directly to the power of policy. It's a straight line. But, and this is so important to remember, for King, winning the fight against legal segregation was never the final goal. He saw it as just one piece of the puzzle, just one part of a much broader, more complex vision of what true justice really looked like. Yeah, in his final years, he really broadened his focus. He started talking about what he called the triple evils: racism, poverty, and war. He began planning this huge Poor People's Campaign, a multiracial coalition to demand economic justice. And he became a really vocal, really powerful critic of the Vietnam War, arguing that it was stealing resources from the fight against poverty right here at home. And then, on April 4th, 1968, his life was tragically cut short. He was only 39 years old. But it's so crucial to remember where he was when he was assassinated. He was in Memphis, Tennessee, to support striking sanitation workers. These were men fighting for better pay and safer working conditions. He died fighting for economic justice for all people. Today, of course, his legacy is honored in so many ways. There's a national holiday, a beautiful memorial in Washington, D.C., and of course, the Nobel Peace Prize he was awarded back in 1964. All of these are just testaments to the profound, lasting impact of his life and of his carefully, brilliantly executed strategy for change. So, in the end, King's strategy showed the world something really powerful. That progress, well, it isn't always comfortable. It's not always convenient. Sometimes it requires forcing a direct, unavoidable confrontation with an unjust reality. And that leaves us with a pretty critical question, not just about his time, but about our own. It's a question for all of us to think about. When is creating a crisis actually necessary for progress?